Imagine standing in the middle of a frozen battlefield, surrounded by the screams of dying men and the scent of iron-thick blood, only to realize that the deadliest man there doesn't even want to hold a sword. Most people think being a Viking is about the glory of the kill and a seat in Valhalla. But for one man, the greatest victory was escaping the war entirely. We open on a scene of absolute carnage, where a mountain of a man moves like a ghost through the chaos, snapping bones and shattering shields with a terrifying, effortless grace. This is Thors Snorrason, a warrior so feared they call him the Troll of Jom, but in this moment of peak violence, he does something unthinkable. He drops his blade into the freezing ocean and disappears into the mist, leaving behind the life of a killer for a chance at peace. But in the world of the Vikings, peace isn't something you're given, it's something you pay for in blood. And Thor's past is about to come knocking with a vengeance that will shatter his family forever. The story takes place in a world where the sea is a graveyard and the wind carries the scent of burning villages. This is 11th century Europe, a time when the Northmen dominated the waves and the word mercy didn't exist in their vocabulary. Our protagonist, Thorfinn, starts as nothing more than a wide-eyed boy living in a remote village in Iceland, dreaming of adventures and a legendary land far to the west called Vinland. He doesn't know about the bodies his father buried to give him this life. He only knows the warmth of the hearth and the tall tales of the traveler Leif Erikson. Thorfinn's world is small, cold, and safe, or at least, that's what his father wanted him to believe. But the reality of the era is far more brutal than a child can imagine. And the peaceful life they've built on the edge of the world is nothing more than a fragile glass house waiting for the first stone to be thrown. In episode 1, we see the stark contrast between the legend of the warrior and the reality of the father. Thors has spent 15 years hiding in the snowy silence of Iceland, raising a family and helping his neighbors. He's a man who can break a person's neck with one hand, yet he spends his days sheep shearing and teaching his son about the value of life. Thorfinn, however, is restless. He sees the swords of the village elders and hears the songs of glory, and he wants in. He wants to be a true warrior, a phrase his father uses often, but with a meaning Thorfinn is far too young to understand. To the boy, a warrior is someone who wins. To the father, a true warrior is someone who doesn't need a weapon at all. But that philosophy is about to be put to the ultimate test because the horizon is no longer empty. The peace is shattered when a massive Jomsviking warship, draped in the black and red of the elite mercenary corps, cuts through the icy waters toward their village. Leading them is Floki, a man with a cold stare and a long memory. He hasn't come to trade, he's come to collect a debt of desertion. This is where everything changes for the small community. Floki reveals Thor's secret past to the villagers, demanding that the troll return to the front lines of the war in England or watch his village burn to the ground. Thors has no choice. To save the people he loves, he must return to the world of shadows he fought so hard to leave behind. What he doesn't know is that Floki has no intention of letting him return alive. What happens when you back the most dangerous animal in the world into a corner with absolutely no way out? You don't get a surrender. You get a bloodbath that echoes through history. We open on the grand firelit hall of York, where the air is thick with the smell of roasted boar and expensive wine. Hundreds of Viking lords are laughing, completely unaware that they are currently sitting in a locked slaughterhouse. King Sweyn sits on his throne, his crown catching the firelight, looking down at Askeladd with a smile so venomous it could kill a horse. The king thinks he has just won the ultimate game of chess, checking the brilliant mercenary commander into an impossible corner. But the king has made one fatal miscalculation. He thinks Askeladd is a dog that can be put on a leash. What he doesn't know is that Askeladd is a dying dragon, and tonight, the wine won't be the only thing spilling across the royal floors. The story takes place in a world where a king's word can burn a nation to ash, and the only way to save a life is to take 100 others. Our protagonist, Thorfinn, has hit rock bottom. Following his crushing physical and mental defeat by Askeladd, the boy has been thrown into a dark, freezing dungeon for causing a scene in the streets. His status has dropped from an elite assassin to a broken, forgotten prisoner, rotting in the dark while the true climax of his life story unfolds in the hall directly above him. He has spent 10 years sharpening his blade for this exact night, yet he is completely isolated from the apocalypse that is about to begin. But the real nightmare is happening upstairs, because the political tension has finally snapped and the great game of survival is over. In episode 23, King Sweyn delivers his killing blow, not with a sword, but with a decree. He publicly announces his plan to invade Wales in the spring. He looks right at Askeladd, forcing the mercenary to make an impossible choice: either assassinate Prince Canute right here and now to prove his loyalty to the crown, or watch his beloved Welsh homeland be burned to the ground by the Danish fleet. Askeladd's face is a masterclass in suppressed panic. The brilliant strategist, the man who always has a backup plan, is completely out of moves. If he kills Canute, he loses the future king he carefully molded and signs his own death warrant anyway. If he refuses, Wales burns. The trap is perfect. And this is where the genius tactician stops playing the board and decides to flip the entire table. Moving into the breathtaking episode 24, the atmosphere in the hall shifts from festive to suffocating. Askeladd steps forward, head bowed, appearing to submit to the king. But as he speaks, his words are laced with a strange, dark poison. He begins to talk about his true lineage, claiming his Welsh name, Lucius Artorius Castus. He isn't a filthy Danish mercenary, he is the descendant of the true kings of Britannia. The lords in the hall start laughing, thinking he has finally lost his mind from the stress, but that was just the beginning of the end. Askeladd raises his head, looks King Sweyn dead in the eyes, and calls his face ugly. The silence that follows is deafening. In a world where insulting a king is a guaranteed execution, Askeladd has just painted a target on his own chest, but the real shock was about to hit them. Before the royal guards can even draw their weapons, Askeladd bridges the gap with terrifying speed, drawing his sword in a single, fluid motion. The scene explodes into chaos. With one clean swing, Askeladd decapitates King Sweyn. The king's head bounces across the stone floor, his crown clattering away into the shadows. The entire hall freezes in pure, unadulterated horror. Askeladd stands over the bleeding stump of the monarch, his sword dripping, laughing like a maniac. He has feigned madness to commit regicide, ensuring that his actions are seen as the act of a lone lunatic, thereby keeping the blame entirely off of Wales and Prince Canute. But this isn't an escape plan. It's a suicide mission. Floki and the royal guards swarm him, and the great mercenary fights like a demon, cutting down men left and right. He is buying time. He is waiting for Canute to realize what must be done. To become the undisputed king, Canute must be the one to strike down his father's mad killer. Every second is an escalation of pure emotional agony. Deep below, Thorfinn hears the commotion and breaks out of his cell, desperately sprinting up the stone stairs. His internal monologue is screaming. He can't let anyone else kill Askeladd. That life belongs to him. He bursts through the heavy oak doors of the great hall, only to be met with a sight that shatters his mind into a million pieces. Prince Canute has stepped forward and driven a sword straight through Askeladd's chest. The mad dog falls to his knees, his lifeblood pooling on the stones. Thorfinn doesn't understand. He drops his dagger, his eyes wide with a terror he hasn't felt since he was 6 years old, running to catch the man he has hated for a decade. The resolution of this brutal saga takes place on the blood-soaked floor of York. Thorfinn cradles dying Askeladd in his arms, screaming at him to get up, demanding his duel. But Askeladd just looks at the boy with a mix of pity and harsh love. In his final breath, he asks Thorfinn the question that will define the rest of the series. How do you plan to live your life after I'm gone? He tells the boy to move forward, to go further than his father Thors ever did, and become a true warrior. And then, the light fades from Askeladd's eyes. The man who ruined Thorfinn's life, the man who raised him, the man who was both his greatest enemy and his twisted father figure, is dead. Thorfinn loses his mind. He screams, slashing wildly at Canute, only to be tackled by the guards and dragged away. As he is pulled out of the hall, the dagger that belonged to his father falls from his hand, sinking into the cold stone floor, left behind forever. The prologue has officially ended, and Thorfinn's world has been entirely burned to the ground. He chased revenge for 10 years, only to end up with nothing but blood on his hands and an empty void in his chest. But, you see, a forest can only grow back stronger after a devastating fire. What happens to a weapon of war when the war is finally over? Moving into episode 2, the tension ramps up as Thors begins to prepare for a journey that everyone except Thorfinn knows is a suicide mission. The boy is ecstatic, thinking his father is finally going to show him the glory of the Viking way. He sneaks onto the ship, hiding among the barrels, driven by a naive desire to see the world. As the small crew of village youths and Thors set sail, the atmosphere shifts from the bright whites of Iceland to the oppressive dark blues of the open sea. Thors is haunted. Every wave seems to carry the ghosts of the men he killed years ago. He tries to shield the young men on the boat from the reality of war, but the shadow of death is already trailing them in the form of a second fleet. This second fleet belongs to Askeladd, a mercenary leader who is the complete opposite of Thors. Askeladd doesn't care about honor or true warriors. He cares about gold, strategy, and winning at any cost. He's been hired by Floki to assassinate Thors in cold blood. This is where the real nightmare starts. As Thor's boat enters a narrow trap in the Faroe Islands, they find themselves boxed in by Askeladd's seasoned killers. The peaceful father is gone, and the troll of Jom is forced to resurface. But even as Thors prepares to fight, he makes a vow. He will not kill a single man. He steps onto the enemy deck unarmed, a move that confuses the mercenaries and sets the stage for one of the most intense psychological and physical battles in the series. By episode 3, the stakes have reached a breaking point. Thors is dismantling Askeladd's men with his bare hands, moving with a speed that defies his massive frame. He's a hurricane of controlled violence, breaking ribs and knocking men unconscious, yet never drawing a blade. Askeladd, watching from his throne on the deck, realizes he isn't fighting a man. He's fighting a force of nature. He decides to challenge Thors to a duel, hoping to use his cunning to overcome the giant's strength. The duel is a masterpiece of tension, with Thors proving that he is leagues above Askeladd in skill. He wins the fight, holding his sword to Askeladd's throat, but in his mercy, he grants the mercenary a chance to surrender. It's a fatal mistake. Askeladd is a man who plays by no rules, and the moment Thors lowers his guard, the archers hidden in the cliffs reveal themselves. Thorfinn, who had been watching in horror from the ship, is grabbed and used as a hostage. The sight of his son with a blade to his throat breaks Thors in a way no army ever could. To save Thorfinn and the young men of his village, the greatest warrior in the world makes the ultimate sacrifice. He stands tall, dropping his weapon, and allows a rain of arrows to pierce his body. He dies on his feet, a literal pincushion of wood and iron, with a final look of love for his son. In that moment, Thorfinn's childhood doesn't just end, it is incinerated. The resolution of this first arc is a bitter pill to swallow. The legendary Thors is gone, and the village boys are sent home, but Thorfinn refuses to leave. His heart is consumed by a singular poisonous goal: revenge. He doesn't go back to his mother or sister. Instead, he jumps onto Askeladd's ship, a small, broken boy clutching his father's dagger. He has lost his home, his innocence, and his father, all in a single afternoon. He is now a stray dog in a pack of wolves, following the man who murdered his father, waiting for the chance to slit his throat. But the journey is only just beginning, and the path Thorfinn has chosen will lead him into a hell deeper than he ever imagined. If you think this was a tragedy, wait until you see what happens when the boy who wanted to be a warrior finally gets his wish. How does a child survive among the very monsters who took everything from him? How long could you survive in the freezing wilderness with nothing but a dagger and a heart full of hate? For most 10-year-olds, the answer is a few hours. For Thorfinn, it became a decade-long nightmare. We see him now, huddled in the corner of a damp, salt-crusted boat, his hands shaking not from the cold, but from the raw, unadulterated fury coursing through his veins. He is surrounded by the very men who laughed as his father died, and yet he isn't running away. He is waiting. Every time Askeladd closes his eyes to sleep, Thorfinn is there, lurking in the shadows like a starved wolf, his father's short sword gripped so tight his knuckles are white. This isn't a story about a hero's journey. It's a story about how a soul is systematically dismantled and rebuilt into a weapon of war. The story takes place in a world where survival is the only law, and for Thorfinn, that law is written in blood. He has transitioned from a warm home in Iceland to the literal belly of the beast. Askeladd doesn't kill the boy, not because he's kind, but because a hungry wolf is useful. He treats Thorfinn like a stray dog, tossing him scraps of food only when the boy completes tasks that would break a grown man. Thorfinn's status is lower than a slave. He is a tool, a scout, and an assassin in the making. He believes that if he can just kill Askeladd in a fair duel, he will regain his father's honor. But what he doesn't realize is that by playing Askeladd's game, he is slowly becoming exactly like the man he hates. In episode 4, we witness the true horror of Thorfinn's training. While Askeladd's crew raids villages and feasts on stolen wine, Thorfinn is left to fend for himself. We see him alone on a desolate coast, trying to hunt for food with a blade meant for killing men. He is starving, freezing, and hallucinating from exhaustion. At one point, he manages to kill a bird, tearing into the raw meat with his bare teeth. This is the moment Thorfinn's humanity begins to fracture. He isn't a child anymore. He is a predator. But the real nightmare was about to start when Askeladd finally gives him a real mission. He tells the boy that if he can take the head of an enemy commander, he'll be granted a formal duel. Thorfinn doesn't hesitate. He plunges into the dark forest, and for the first time, he doesn't just see a target, he sees a path to his revenge. The pacing shifts gears as we enter episode 5, jumping forward in time. The small, scrawny boy is gone, replaced by a teenager with dead eyes and movements so fast they're almost impossible to track. It's now 1013 AD, and the Vikings have launched a full-scale invasion of England. Askeladd's crew has grown into a formidable mercenary army, and at the front of every charge is Thorfinn. He has become Askeladd's ace in the hole, but that was just the beginning of his descent. We see him infiltrating an English fortress, moving through the rafters like a ghost. He doesn't use a shield or heavy armor. He relies on 2 daggers and a terrifying level of agility. When he reaches the commander, there is no hesitation, no prayer, just a quick, clinical strike to the throat. He brings the head back to Askeladd, dripping with blood, demanding his duel. This leads us into a cycle of brutal escalation. Askeladd, ever the manipulator, keeps his word but rigs the game. In episode 6, we see their duel. Thorfinn is a whirlwind of blades, fueled by years of pent-up rage, but Askeladd is a master of psychological warfare. He mocks Thors, calling him a fool for dying the way he did. This sends Thorfinn into a blind, reckless frenzy, exactly what Askeladd wanted. With a simple trip and a heavy blow, Askeladd leaves the boy face down in the dirt, reminded once again that rage without control is just a death wish. "You're still just a brat?" Askeladd sneers, and this is where everything changes. Thorfinn realizes that to kill this man, he has to become even more monstrous. He has to survive battles that no one else can. The war for England intensifies as the Viking king, Sweyn, pushes further inland. Askeladd's men are hired to take a heavily fortified bridge in London, guarded by a man who makes Thors look like a commoner. This is our introduction to Thorkel the Tall, a giant of a man who lives for the joy of battle. While the rest of the Viking fleet is being crushed by Thorkel's massive boulders and sheer strength, Askeladd sits back, watching the carnage with a bored expression. He knows he can't win this with brute force. He needs someone small, fast, and desperate enough to dive into the heart of the meat grinder. He looks at Thorfinn, and without a word, the boy knows what is expected of him. But what Thorfinn didn't know was that Thorkel isn't just another soldier. He's a living legend who knew Thors personally. As Thorfinn sprints across the rigging of the ships, dodging spears that could impale a horse, He is heading toward a collision that will reveal the truth about his father's past and the true nature of the Viking world. Every scene is leading naturally to this explosion of violence. Thorfinn manages to get close enough to Thorkel to draw blood, a feat no other man has accomplished in years. The giant is delighted. For the first time in a decade, Thorfinn finds someone who actually challenges his skill, but the sheer power gap is terrifying. The resolution of this part shows Thorfinn battered, bruised, but still standing. He has survived the front lines of the London invasion, but the mission is a failure. London holds, and the Viking army is forced to retreat. Askeladd, however, isn't worried. He's already thinking 3 steps ahead, looking at the young Prince Canute, the heir to the Danish throne, who is being held in the middle of the war zone. Thorfinn is once again just a piece on a chessboard, his life risked for a cause he doesn't even understand. He stands on the deck of the ship, looking at his blood-stained hands, the image of his father's peaceful face fading further and further away into the fog of war. He is no longer the boy from Iceland. He is the shadow of a man who died for peace, using his father's tools to create nothing but chaos. The emotional payoff is bitter. He is stronger than ever. Yet, he has never been more lost. But the real test is coming. Askeladd is about to make a move that will pull Thorfinn into the highest circles of power and betrayal. How do you protect a prince when you're a killer who knows no loyalty? What if the person destined to rule an empire was too terrified to even speak? You'd expect the heir to the Danish throne to be a towering conqueror, a man of iron and fire. But when Thorfinn finally lays eyes on Prince Canute, he doesn't see a king, he sees a shivering, delicate girl hiding behind a priest. We open on the smoldering ruins of a battlefield where the troll Thorkel is laughing amidst a pile of severed limbs, having just single-handedly dismantled the English defense. But the real shock isn't the violence. It's the realization that the entire Viking invasion now hinges on a boy who looks like he's never even held a kitchen knife, let alone a sword. This is the moment the war stops being about land and starts being a desperate game of survival, where the hunter and the prey are constantly swapping places in a blizzard that threatens to bury them all. The story takes place in a world where a king's worth is measured in how many men he can lead to their deaths. And right now, Prince Canute's worth is exactly 0. The Danish army is in a state of chaotic retreat after the failure at London Bridge, and Askeladd, ever the opportunist, has managed to snatch the prince right out from under the nose of the legendary Thorkel. But this isn't a rescue. It's a kidnapping disguised as protection. Thorfinn is now tasked with being the personal bodyguard for a prince who refuses to look him in the eye. In a world where the English are closing in from the south and the monstrous Thorkel is hunting them from the north. The protagonist's status has shifted from a mere assassin to the ward of a crown. But in the freezing heart of the English wilderness, a crown is just a piece of metal that makes your head a bigger target. In episode 7, the sheer absurdity of their situation becomes clear. Thorkel is bored. He is so bored with the weak soldiers he's fighting that he decides to switch sides just for the fun of it, joining the English to hunt down his own countrymen. He wants a challenge, and he knows Askeladd has the prince. This sets off a high-stakes chase through the dense, snow-covered forests of England. Askeladd's men are beginning to murmur. They are warriors who want gold and glory, not a long, freezing march guarding a silent prince who spends all his time praying with a drunk priest and a stern caretaker named Ragnar. But Askeladd's charisma keeps them in line for now. He knows that if he can deliver Canute to King Sweyn, he'll have more power than any Jarl in the north. But that was just the beginning of the internal rot. Moving into episode 8, the psychological pressure starts to fracture the group. Thorfinn is forced to live in close quarters with the prince, and his contempt is palpable. He sees Canute as a weakling, a mirror of everything his father told him not to be, yet he's bound to protect him if he ever wants his duel with Askeladd. We see a moment of quiet intensity where Thorfinn is sharpening his blades in the dark, and Canute is huddled by the fire, trembling. The silence between them is heavier than the sound of the wind outside. And this is where everything changes. Askeladd realizes that they cannot outrun Thorkel forever with a full army. He needs to move faster. which means making a decision that will stain all their souls forever. This leads us into the brutal reality of Episode 9, and the true nightmare begins. To survive the winter and stay hidden from Thorkel's scouts, Askeladd leads his men to a small, peaceful English village tucked away in the mountains. The villagers are Christians, simple farmers who offer the travelers what little food they have. But Askeladd isn't looking for a meal, he's looking for a hiding spot. In a sequence that is as cold and clinical as a surgeon's knife, he orders his men to slaughter every single man, woman, and child in the village. If one person escapes to tell the English where they are, they all die. We watch through Thorfinn's eyes as the snow turns from a pure, blinding white to a sickening, steaming crimson. He doesn't help with the killing, but he doesn't stop it either. He just watches, his heart as frozen as the ground beneath him. But the real escalation happens when they realize they miss someone. A single girl managed to hide during the massacre, slipping away into the woods. If she reaches a nearby garrison, Askeladd's plan collapses, and the prince is as good as dead. The tension is suffocating as the mercenaries realize the girl is out there in the blizzard, a living timer counting down to their execution. Askeladd sends his men to hunt her down, but the blizzard is a chaotic veil. The men are starting to realize that Askeladd's luck might be running out. For the first time, we see a flicker of genuine fear in the eyes of the hardened mercenaries. They are thousands of miles from home, surrounded by enemies, and their leader has just committed an atrocity that even God can't ignore. The resolution of this chapter is a haunting look at the cost of ambition. The village is silent now, just a collection of burning huts and bodies being covered by a fresh layer of snow. Canute is physically ill, his faith shattered by the horror he has witnessed, while Ragnar tries desperately to shield him from the truth of the world. Thorfinn stands on the edge of the village, looking out into the white void. He is part of this now. He is the guardian of a graveyard. The emotional payoff is a hollow, aching realization. There is no glory in this war, only a slow, grinding descent into the dark. But the peace of the graveyard doesn't last. The girl they missed wasn't just a witness. She was the spark that would lead the giant Thorkel straight to their doorstep. Askeladd's men are on the verge of mutiny, and the prince is still a shell of a man. How do you lead an army when your men no longer trust you, and your only hope is a boy who can't even speak his own name? The greatest threat to a commander isn't the army standing in front of him, it's the hungry, terrified men standing right behind him. We open on a scene of pure, frozen desperation, where the air is so cold its lungs feel like they're breathing in shattered glass. Askeladd's men, the same warriors who laughed through the slaughter of a village, are now staring at their leader with eyes full of murder. They are trapped between a blizzard and the approaching monster Thorkel, and for the first time in a decade, Askeladd's silver tongue can't save him. The loyalty of a Viking is bought with gold and maintained by success. But when the gold runs out and the success turns into a suicide march, the wolves will always turn on their alpha. This is the moment the facade of the great mercenary leader finally cracks, and the boy prince is forced to step over the literal corpse of his childhood. The story takes place in a world where love is considered a weakness, and a king is only as strong as his ability to survive a betrayal. Askeladd's company is no longer a warband. It's a powder keg waiting for a spark. Thorfinn finds himself in the most confusing position of his life. He hates Askeladd more than anything in this world, yet he is the only person standing between Askeladd and the 50 men who want to rip him apart. His status has shifted from an assassin to a reluctant shield. He doesn't do it out of loyalty, but out of a twisted sense of ownership. If anyone is going to kill Askeladd, it's going to be him. But the real nightmare was about to start, because Thorkel the Tall hasn't just found them. He's brought a literal forest of spears with him. In episode 10, the tension finally snaps. As the English snow turns into a swirling gray veil, Askeladd's second-in-command, Bjorn, realizes that the men are planning a mutiny. He is the only one truly loyal to Askeladd, but even his berserker strength might not be enough. The air is thick with the scent of betrayal. Askeladd, sensing the end, gives Thorfinn one final task. Take the prince and run. But that was just the beginning of the chaos. As the mutiny erupts into a frantic, bloody skirmish in the snow, the screams of the dying are drowned out by a sound that makes everyone's blood run cold, the booming, joyful laughter of Thorkel. The giant has arrived, and he doesn't care who is a mutineer and who is a loyalist. He just wants to see who is worth killing. Moving into episode 11, the narrative shifts into a high-octane survival horror. Thorfinn is forced into a rematch with Thorkel to buy time for the prince's escape. This isn't the controlled duel they had in London. This is a desperate, dirty struggle for survival in the middle of a collapsing army. Thorkel is a force of nature, swinging axes that split trees like toothpicks, while Thorfinn has to use every ounce of his agility just to stay in one piece. But while the warriors are busy tearing each other apart, Askeladd is playing a much darker game. He knows that as long as Ragnar, the prince's protective caretaker, is alive, Canute will never grow. In a move of calculated, heartless cruelty, Askeladd ensures Ragnar is removed from the equation. He doesn't just want Canute to survive. He wants to kill the boy so the king can be born. The emotional momentum reaches a fever pitch in episode 12 as the dust and the blood begins to settle. Thorfinn is battered and broken, having barely survived his encounter with Thorkel by using his father's old techniques to dislocate the giant's arm. But the real shift isn't physical. It happens in the heart of Prince Canute. Standing over the body of the only man who ever loved him, Canute finally stops praying. He looks at the world, a world of senseless slaughter, of freezing winters, and of men who act like beasts, and he realizes that God isn't coming to save them. The silent prince finally speaks, and his voice carries a weight that silences even the battle-hardened Thorkel. He isn't a scared child anymore. He is a man who has looked into the abyss and decided to conquer it. This is where everything changes for the entire power structure of the series. Canute doesn't just demand the fighting stop. He commands it. He stands before Thorkel, the man who just slaughtered half of Askeladd's company, and speaks to him not as a captive, but as a sovereign. He realizes that if the world is a hell, then he must be the one to build a paradise on earth, even if he has to walk over mountains of bodies to do it. Thorkel, fascinated by this sudden transformation, decides to pledge his loyalty to the prince. In one afternoon, the dynamic has flipped. The weakling is now the leader, and the mercenaries are now his subjects. The resolution of this arc is a chilling look at the new Canute. He walks through the remains of the mutiny, his eyes cold and distant, mirroring the same dead look Thorfinn has carried for years. He has lost his innocence, but he has gained a kingdom. Askeladd watches this with a dark, satisfied smile. He has created the monster he needed to save his own homeland of Wales, but he has also created a king who might eventually be his undoing. Thorfinn stands on the sidelines, confused and forgotten, his simple quest for revenge suddenly dwarfed by the grand, terrifying ambitions of the men around him. But the real nightmare is only just beginning. With Thorkel and Askeladd now serving the same prince, they are heading straight into the heart of the Danish court to face King Sweyn. The war for England is merging with a war for the throne, and Thorfinn is nothing more than a stray dog caught in a den of lions. How do you find justice for your father when you're surrounded by men who have forgotten the meaning of the word? What do you do when the man who tried to murder you is your own father, and he's currently sitting on the most powerful throne in the north? We open on the golden, oppressive halls of Gainsborough, where the air is thick with the smell of roasted meat and the even stronger scent of hidden daggers. Prince Canute, the boy who once trembled at the sight of a drop of blood, now walks into his father's court with the stride of a conqueror, flanked by the two most dangerous men in England, the tactical genius Askeladd and the mountain of muscle Thorkel. The Viking world is built on strength, but here, in the heart of the Danish occupation, the strongest weapon isn't an axe, it's a well-placed whisper. This is the moment the war for land turns into a war for the soul of an empire, and Thorfinn is standing right in the middle of it. A wolf in a room full of vipers. The story takes place in a world where family ties are just another leash to be cut, and for King Sweyn, his son Canute is a loose end that refused to be tied. The protagonist's status has shifted. Thorfinn is no longer just a mercenary's tool, he is the official bodyguard of a man who is technically a walking dead man. Askeladd has played his cards perfectly, positioning himself as the kingmaker, but he's walking a razor-thin tightrope. One wrong word to the king, and they all end up on pikes. The tension in the court is so high, you can practically hear the iron singing in its scabbards. But the real nightmare was about to start because King Sweyn isn't just a tyrant, he's a master of the very same psychological games Askeladd has used to keep Thorfinn in line for years. In episode 13, we see the arrival of this unlikely trio at the royal camp. The sheer scale of the Danish army is breathtaking, a forest of masts and shields that makes Thorfinn's small world feel even more insignificant. While the soldiers cheer for their heroic prince, Askeladd is already scouting the exits. He knows that Sweyn's smile is a death sentence. We see a chilling moment where Askeladd and the king share a look, a silent recognition between two monsters who know exactly what the other is capable of. But that was just the beginning of the intrigue. Thorfinn, meanwhile, is losing his mind. He's surrounded by the luxury of the court, but all he can think about is the fact that he's still no closer to killing Askeladd. His rage is boiling over, and he's starting to realize that in this world of politics, his daggers might not be enough. Moving into episode 14, the mask finally slips. Canute is granted a private audience with his father, and the atmosphere is cold enough to freeze time. King Sweyn doesn't apologize for trying to have his son killed in the war. He justifies it. To a king, a weak heir is a liability to the crown. He challenges Canute, testing the boy's new resolve, and for the first time, Canute doesn't flinch. He stands his ground, his eyes as cold as the North Sea. But this is where everything changes for Askeladd. He realizes that the king has a new target, Wales. Askeladd's secret homeland, the one place he truly cares about, is now on the chopping block. The king is using Wales as leverage to keep Askeladd in check, and for the first time in the entire series, we see a flicker of genuine, unadulterated panic in Askeladd's eyes. The narrative escalates in episode 15, when a ghost from the past suddenly appears in the middle of the camp. Leif Erikson, the man who told Thorfinn stories of Vinland all those years ago, has finally tracked him down. This should be a moment of joy, a chance for Thorfinn to go home. But the boy he finds isn't the one he left in Iceland. Thorfinn looks at the man who represents his father's peaceful legacy and feels nothing but contempt. He is so far gone, so consumed by the warrior life that he can't even remember what a home feels like. I have things to do, Thorfinn says, his voice like gravel, as he turns his back on his only chance at salvation. What he didn't know was that by staying, he was walking straight into a trap that would change the course of history. As we reach the middle of the court drama in episode 16, the peace of the camp is shattered by a sudden assassination attempt. It's a chaotic, moonlit scramble where Thorfinn's instincts are the only thing that keeps Canute alive. But the real shock isn't the assassin, it's who sent them. Askeladd realizes that the king is done playing games. He is going to force a confrontation, and he's going to use the upcoming grand banquet in York to finish what he started. The mini-hooks are everywhere now. Is Askeladd losing his edge? Can Thorfinn stay loyal to a man who is clearly falling apart? And most importantly, what is the king's true endgame? Every scene leads naturally to the next escalation as the board is set for a final, bloody feast. The resolution of this part is a heavy, brooding silence before the storm. Thorfinn sits on the roof of the Great Hall, watching the snow fall over the thousands of Viking tents. He is a child of war, a boy who has never known a day without a blade in his hand, and he is starting to feel the weight of it. He's tired, but the momentum of his revenge won't let him stop. Across the camp, Canute is preparing for the banquet, knowing that he is walking into a den of lions with nothing but his wits to protect him. The emotional payoff is the realization that these two boys, the assassin and the prince, are both prisoners of the same system slaves to a crown they never asked for. But the real nightmare is just a heartbeat away. The king has called for a celebration, but in the Viking world, A banquet is just a battlefield with better food. Askeladd is backed into a corner, and a cornered wolf is the most dangerous animal in the woods. He is about to make a choice that will either save his people or burn the entire world to the ground. Have you ever looked into a mirror and realized you don't even recognize the person looking back at anymore? That's the exact moment Thorfinn is living through as he stands on the cold, windswept docks of York. He spent a decade chasing a ghost, sharpening his hate like a blade, only to find that the world has moved on without him. We open on a hauntingly quiet scene where the roaring fires of the Viking camp feel miles away, replaced by the rhythmic, mocking sound of the tide hitting the hulls of the longships. Thorfinn is a killer, a tool of the very man he wants to destroy, and as the royal fleet arrives in the city of York, he realizes that the cage he's built for himself is getting smaller by the second. But the real shock isn't the thousands of soldiers or the looming shadow of the king, it's the realization that the glory he's been chasing is nothing but a mountain of rotting corpses. The story takes place in a world where the past is a debt that eventually has to be paid in full. And in episode 17, Thorfinn is forced to face a man who represents everything he threw away. Leif Erikson has spent years searching the icy seas for the boy he once told stories to, and when he finally tracks Thorfinn down in the muddy streets of York, the confrontation is a gut punch to the soul. Leif doesn't see a warrior. He sees a lost, broken child covered in the blood of strangers. He pleads with Thorfinn to come home, to return to the mother and sister who still wait for him in Iceland. But Thorfinn's heart is a fortress of ice. He has traded his humanity for a chance at revenge, and to turn back now would mean admitting that his father's death was for nothing. What he doesn't realize is that by staying, he isn't honoring Thors, he's burying him all over again. In episode 18, the atmosphere shifts from personal tragedy to a high-stakes political chess match. The Great Council of York is about to begin, and the city is a powder keg. King Sweyn is no longer hiding his intentions. He wants to break Canute and eliminate Askeladd once and for all. Askeladd, usually the most composed man in the room, is starting to show the cracks. The weight of his dual heritage, the son of a Viking and a Welsh princess, is pulling him apart. He has spent his whole life hating the Danes, yet he has become their most effective weapon. Now, the king is using that very weapon to threaten the only thing Askeladd loves, the land of Wales. This is the moment where we see the invincible strategist truly cornered. Every move he makes to save Wales puts a target on his back, and every move he makes to stay alive brings the Danish axes closer to his homeland. The pacing ramps up as we enter episode 19, and the mini-hooks start hitting like hammer blows. We see Thorfinn wandering the city, a predator without a purpose, until he is provoked into a street brawl that nearly costs him his life. He is reckless, fueled by a desperation that is starting to turn into madness. He doesn't just want to kill Askeladd anymore. He needs to, because if he doesn't, he has no reason to exist. But the real nightmare is brewing inside the Great Hall. The council is a display of absolute power, where King Sweyn doles out land and titles like a god. But beneath the surface, the daggers are being unsheathed. Askeladd realizes that the king has set a trap that even he can't talk his way out of. Sweyn announces his plan to invade Wales in the spring, a move designed specifically to force Askeladd's hand. This is where everything changes for the entire power dynamic of the series. Askeladd is forced to choose between his personal survival and the survival of his people. If he stays silent, Wales burns. If he speaks out, he is a traitor. And this is the point where the hero and the villain of our story start to merge into something much more complex. We see Askeladd looking at Thorfinn, perhaps seeing a reflection of his own wasted youth, and we see Thorfinn looking at the throne, realizing that the true warrior his father spoke of would never have set foot in this room of liars. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a CX. And the logical escalation of every previous betrayal is leading us to a moment of absolute violence that no one is prepared for. But the real danger wasn't just in the king's words. It was in the silence that followed. As the council breaks for the day, the air in York is heavy with the scent of an approaching storm. Thorfinn is lurking in the shadows of the palace, his eyes fixed on Askeladd, waiting for their final duel. He doesn't care about Wales, he doesn't care about the crown, and he doesn't care about the thousands of lives hanging in the balance. He is a singular point of hatred in a world that is about to explode. What he didn't know was that Askeladd was already making a final, desperate plan that would render Thorfinn's revenge meaningless. The resolution of this part leaves us on the edge of a knife. The stage is set for the final banquet, and the players are all in position. Canute has found his voice, Sweyn has set his trap, and Askeladd is ready to make the ultimate gamble. Thorfinn stands on the battlements of York, looking down at the flickering torches of the city, unaware that the world he has known for 10 years is about to be burned to the ground. The emotional payoff is a sense of impending doom, a realization that no matter who wins the battle for the throne, the boy from Iceland has already lost everything that mattered. But the real nightmare hasn't even reached its peak yet. The final feast is being prepared, and the king is expecting a show. Askeladd is about to perform a feat of madness that will echo through history, and Thorfinn is about to find out what happens when the man you've dedicated your life to killing becomes the person who saves your soul by destroying his own. What hurts more, taking a blade from your worst enemy, or having to drive your own sword through the heart of your only friend? In the brutal world of the Vikings, there is no retirement, no peaceful old age by the fire, and certainly no mercy for the weak. You either die with a sword in your hand, or you suffer the ultimate disgrace of rotting in the dirt, forever denied the gates of Valhalla. We open on a scene that strips away all the political maneuvering of the York Council and brings us back to the raw, bleeding core of this era. Askeladd, the mastermind who has outsmarted kings and commanders, is standing in a quiet snowfield, his sword drawn. But he isn't facing an assassin or a king. He is facing Bjorn, his loyal second-in-command, a man who has followed him through a decade of slaughter. Bjorn is dying from a wound he took during the mutiny, and he has one final, heartbreaking request. This is the moment the facade of the cold-hearted mercenary shatters, and we finally see the crushing weight of the life Askeladd has chosen to lead. The story takes place in a world where the only heaven is a hall of perpetual violence, and the only way to get there is to be killed by someone stronger than you. The tension in York is at a breaking point, with King Sweyn preparing his trap for Wales. But before the political explosion happens, the ghosts of Askeladd's mercenary band demand their final rites. Our protagonist, Thorfinn, is sidelined here, forced to watch as the men he spent his entire childhood fighting alongside begin to fall apart. His status is that of a spectator to a tragedy he doesn't fully understand. He has spent 10 years believing that Askeladd is a monster incapable of love or loyalty, but the snowfield outside of York is about to prove him entirely wrong, and the truth is going to hurt far more than a lie ever could. In episode 21, the narrative slows down to focus on the intimate, devastating reality of brotherhood among killers. Bjorn knows he won't survive the winter. His gut wound is festering, and the fever is taking his strength. He begs Askeladd for a duel, needing to die in combat to secure his place in the afterlife. Askeladd agrees without hesitation, leading his oldest companion out into the falling snow. As they clash, it isn't a battle of hatred, it's a dance of profound sorrow. Bjorn swings with everything he has left, but Askeladd easily parries, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a clean, honorable death. But that was just the beginning of the emotional gut punch. As Bjorn falls, bleeding out in the snow, he looks up at the man he served for so long and confesses his deepest secret. He didn't follow Askeladd for the gold or the glory. He followed him because he wanted to be his friend. The silence that follows is suffocating. Askeladd, a man who hates the Danes with every fiber of his being, looks down at this dying Viking and does something he has never done before. He drops his mask. He tells Bjorn, with absolute sincerity, that he was his only friend. It's a beautiful, tragic moment that instantly recontextualizes the entire series. Askeladd isn't just a villain. He is a man trapped in a world he despises, forced to kill the only person who ever truly cared about him just to honor a religion he doesn't even believe in. As Bjorn breathes his last, a heavy shadow falls over Askeladd. The last tether keeping him connected to his past is gone. He is now completely alone, a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. And this is exactly when Thorfinn decides to strike. Moving into episode 22, the grief of the snowfield is immediately replaced by a suffocating, lethal tension. Thorfinn steps forward, his eyes burning with the same obsessive rage he's carried since childhood. He demands his promised duel. Askeladd, physically exhausted and emotionally drained, looks at the boy who has shadowed him for a decade, and he snaps. He agrees to the fight, but he warns Thorfinn that this time he is not going to hold back. This isn't going to be a lesson in combat, it's going to be an execution of Thorfinn's entire worldview. As the two clash in the ruins of York, the physical fight is almost secondary to the psychological torture Askeladd unleashes. Every scene in this duel flows directly from physical impact to mental devastation. Thorfinn swings wildly, fueled by pure adrenaline, but Askeladd dodges with a tired, almost bored precision. He begins to mock Thorfinn, not just for his fighting style, but for his entire pathetic existence. He reveals the truth about his own heritage, that he is a descendant of the legendary King Artorius, the rightful ruler of Britannia, and that he has spent his entire life waiting for a true king to serve. He looks at Thorfinn, a boy who threw away a peaceful life to become a cheap copy of a Viking killer, and calls him a worthless tool. He breaks down exactly how he manipulated Thorfinn for 10 years, predicting his every move because Thorfinn is a slave to his own rage. The climax of the episode is a masterpiece of character deconstruction. Askeladd beats Thorfinn utterly senseless, throwing him to the ground and stomping on his blade. He forces Thorfinn to look at the reality of his life. "What will you do after I'm dead?" Askeladd screams. Thorfinn has no answer. His eyes are wide with shock. Realizing for the first time that his father's death didn't give him a purpose, it trapped him in a cage, and Askeladd has been the one holding the key the entire time. He is left battered and weeping in the dirt, completely broken by the realization that he is nothing more than a hollow weapon. The resolution of this part is a masterclass in tragic irony. Thorfinn is defeated not by a sword, but by the devastating truth. He has spent his entire life chasing a ghost, only to realize he became a ghost himself in the process. Askeladd leaves him lying in the mud, turning his back on the boy for the final time. He has a banquet to attend, a king to face, and a homeland to save. Thorfinn is no longer relevant to the grand design. The emotional payoff leaves a bitter taste. The revenge quest was a lie, and the boy is left with nothing but his own empty reflection. But the true storm hasn't even hit yet. Askeladd is walking straight into King Sweyn's trap, fully prepared to do something so horrific it will rewrite the history of England forever. How far will a man go to protect the only home he has left? The story of the boy who wanted to be a killer is done. Keep watching, because in the next part, we enter a completely different world, and the true journey of Vinland Saga is about to begin. If you thought this was just another action-packed Viking story, think again. Everything you've seen so far, the battles, the betrayals, the legendary duels, was just the prologue. The real story is only just beginning. Thorfinn has reached the end of his path of hate, and it led him to a dead end. But in the shadow of the gallows, a new seed is being planted. Can a man who has taken so many lives ever truly repent? Can someone who has known only war ever find the peace his father died for? The journey from the battlefield to the farmland is a long, painful road, and it's a road we're going to walk together. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the soul of a warrior, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Thorfinn's redemption.